Hi, I'm Catherine Robson, the founder of Affinity Private Advisors. Like many of you, I'm bunkered down at home. I'm following the government's guidelines on social distancing and hoping that the measures that we've put in place are enough to slow infections, to reduce the burden on the healthcare system and hopefully buy us time until an effective treatment becomes available. While it's right that we currently focus on the health impacts of this crisis, what lingers in many of our minds is the inability to really understand what the economic fallout will be. In many ways, this is an unprecedented crisis, given the global coordinated supply and demand side shocks to economies. While we haven't seen this exact crisis before, there are reference points in history, and the most relevant of those is the GFC. Comparing this crisis to the global financial crisis, I think, is helpful to understand what the path forward might look like. Firstly, the GFC was relatively recently. It was only 12 years ago, and many of the experts and the learnings about what worked and what didn't still reside in government, in the public service, and in corporates. That compares to 2008, where it had been 80 years since the Great Depression, the last sizable event that was relevant for comparison. And so at that point, it really was a matter of trial and error. I think we've seen in recent weeks how that recent experience is manifesting itself, with governments being very prompt to act with very significant stimuluses. Comparing the monetary and fiscal stimulus announced in Australia, it'll end up being about 10% of GDP. That compares to about 5% for the total global financial crisis period. By some measures, when you include non-government spending, for example, some of the underwritten lending measures, there are some indications that the stimulus package this time could be up to 400% larger than what occurred in the global financial crisis. Secondly, it's relevant that interest rates are much lower as we go into this crisis. That's not great to the extent that the monetary ammunition available to central banks, including Australia's RBA, is much lower than it was in 2008 and 9. The flip side, though, is that it does allow governments to borrow at very low rates and engage in very targeted fiscal spending, which will be helpful to support those that are most vulnerable. Thirdly, this crisis is very much triggered by an event that gives us a sense of what might catalyse a recovery. What I mean is that in the GFC, it was very hard to know what it would take to make the crisis end. In this case, there's quite a lot of commentary to suggest that once a scalable, effective treatment is available, that will be a catalyst for markets to recover and for economies to then slowly grind forward and back into life as labour is emancipated from social distancing requirements and consumption returns to the system. John Templeton famously said that the words, "this time is different," could be the four most expensive words when it comes to investing. While we are monitoring very closely developments, we do also believe that history is a guide. We know that all of our lives will be touched one way or another by this crisis. But we also know that markets will ultimately recover, and having the courage to stay the course, stick to long-term plans, and ride it out through to the ultimate recovery is a way that we can be confident that we'll emerge financially healthy at the other end. Stay safe, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.